Hi there, I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. You're about to watch a video describing Aries Rising, Aries Lagna, Aries Ascendant, using the whole sign house system, which is the traditional house system used in Vedic astrology as well as Hellenistic astrology. Feel free to leave me a comment or a question if you feel like it. And if you're interested in more of my work, check out dustincormier.com. Enjoy the video. We're about an hour in. Now let us continue on our journey. We are going to now discuss a little bit from what would be more closely. Gosh, I have so many astrology books that I love. This one is très important, mucho important. And this is none other than Light on Life, an introduction to the astrology of India by Hart DeFau and Robert E. Svoboda. This book is one of the first books that really got me into Vedic astrology. And if I ever had to recommend that you check out a book in order to try and learn about Vedic astrology, this would be my recommendation. It's full of wonderful things. Now, a book like this, for how good it is, it still has a lot of, sometimes the things they say in this book can be intense, rather one-pointed, and focused very much on a certain way of thinking about things. There are times when I read certain things and they say, I think, wow, that's intense. So we have to consider this as to be the Vedic perspective generally, because that is really what they're carrying, is the Vedic perspective on a rising sign. The Vedic people tend to practice sidereal astrology. And so sometimes I run into things with sidereal astrologers where you just got to you got to think objectively. But that objectivity is good for us in any information. But these guys are great, and there's amazing things said here. So you'll hear me say, if it comes up, that seems a little harsh, for example. But it's still good. It's in the books, and it's good to think about it. So this is coming from Light on Life, an astrology, an introduction to the astrology of India. We're now going to dig into Aries Lagna, Aries Lasagna, which is known as Aries Rising. What we read is the ram, the goat, the ram, the symbol of Aries, is famous for eagerly running headfirst into obstacles. It's the ram, right? It's always bucking its horns and it's bucking itself forward. This may indicate a person who is prone to head injuries and who attempts to surmount his or her problems by excessive cerebral activity and thinking. The Aries is the one who's sitting like this and who's just like, they're really thinking very deeply, very hard through their logic about whatever it is that they're trying to deal with. This emphasis on the head is compounded by Aries being the first house in the natural zodiac. So that means Aries is the first sign. That's what that's basically saying. And Mars is known for its retrogression, which gives Arians a tendency for displaying idiosyncratic behavior. Aries people can be out of groove, out of sync with the rest of everybody else. In fact, we're going to read that Mars is considered to be the crooked one. I wonder if it's going to be in here. Wow, this is a long one for Mars. These behaviors may be extroverted because Mars is extroverted. Mars, which indicates a general predisposition to violence, be it through accident or through an argument, is a natural significator of accidents. Mars is a karaka of accidents, of things not happening on purpose. interestingly. Sometimes there's a bounce of shadow between themes. Mars represents logic, means doing things strategically. It means using rational logic and reason to apply a train of thought and a cause of action, which leads to logical and inevitable causal consequences. But we can't control everything, so you try and throw a baseball at a target and it accidentally goes through your neighbor's window, you tried to make a certain cause of logical effect happen, but something in the universe was not accounted for in your calculation and caused an accident. So Mars itself can be a signifier of accidents. Now, this tendency for accidents is reinforced by Mars's simultaneous rulership of the 8th house for Scorpio, right? So Mars rules Aries, and Mars rules Scorpio, which is the 8th house. And the 8th house also rules instability and accidents. Aries is essentially the warrior who knows that their bread is buttered on the side of a little bit of paying attention, that soldier. If they have this intelligence and cerebral capacity and instincts, they're going to put themselves in the line of fire because they know that that's where their bread is buttered. So they attract scorpionic 8th house unstable situations to themselves, and they make cash out of it. They're not bad with these things. But this reinforcement of accidents is further enhanced if we take the violent, accident-prone Ketu to be the co-ruler of Aries, which is an interesting phrase. That's a very Indian astrology. This is an example of something that's a very Indian astrology thing to say. There is certainly a correlation between Kuja, as Mars is known, and Ketu. So Mars and Ketu do have very much a relationship. You need a good Mars to have a good Ketu, and you kind of need a good Ketu to have a truly good Mars. So, but to call Ketu the co-ruler of Aries is that's not something that I would abide by in my framing of Aries, but it's interesting to read it here. Hi there. If you've been enjoying this video, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel, How to Rock Astrology. Also, I'll be producing my own original brand of literature pretty soon, including a book entitled An Introduction to Tropical Vedic Astrology. To stay up to date with everything I got going on, you can join my email list by going to dustincormier.com/subscribe or going to the link in the description box. If you do so, you'll be able to download a copy of my free ebook entitled Thread, a Cosmic Short Story. Thanks for watching, folks. Now enjoy the rest of the video. Most of the characteristics of Mars also characterize Pitta. Hey there, Lucas. Nice to hear you. Most of the characteristics of Mars also characterize Pitta. Pitta is the important dosha which Mars rules, and which is therefore often predominant in Arians, particularly because the fiery sun is exalted in the ascendant of an Aries rising. Very interesting. So Pitta really has to do with the sun and Mars. It is the fire dosha. If you've ever gotten into Ayurveda, I think it's something incredibly important for everybody. You can go to an Ayurvedic specialist, you can get your pulse read, they check your tongue, they check your eyes, they check a whole bunch of things about your voice. I am Vata. I've got Vata coming out of my ears. I'm a very Saturnian person. I must have some Pitta in me because I'm Leo rising, but it's, everybody's a combination of all these doshas in a certain way. But it's interesting for an Aries rising. The sun is exalted in the rising sign. So they're going to have some Pitta energy. And Arians just typify the character of Pitta. This kapha, There's going down. There's Pitta, which is forward, and then Vata, which is going up. So Aries' dedication to intensity is compounded by the fact that the Sun, who is a friend of the first house lord, Mars, is exalted in the first house as the lord of the fifth house. So this is some very cool Vedic ways of thinking about a rising sign. Leo rules the fifth house, and the planet that rules the fifth house is exalted in the first house. So the rapid, powerful insight which fiery Mars and Sun together create for an Aries may fuel innate Aries' impatience towards those who do not share their rapidity. The rapidness. It kind of really shows that the fifth house has to do with intelligence. There's an elastic snap to the fifth house, as much as there is to Mars and to the Sun in general. The fifth house has a creative intelligence, which is exalted through in the first house. So even if your Sun is not in Aries, we still have to think, as an Aries rising, what place am I going to act from that is going to serve Leo? As an Aries rising, what place can I act from in a way that is going to exalt the Sun? And how that is by your own natural nature as Aries. By being an Aries, by doing things you would do as an Aries, you are carving a positive energy for your own fifth house. For Leo rising. For Leo, I should say. So that energy brings your thinking in a self-centered way about, this is what I think I would do in this group project or in this situation or for myself. It's going to involve a exaltation of Leo, of your spirit, of who you truly are, of your true nature, of what you're trying to do. So there is a creativity that's naturally served in Aries rising. By being what you are carving a good path for Leo, for the Sun. It's part of the very good karma that Aries rising often has. It actually can be a very spiritual rising sign. Now, when it's unchecked, this impatience of the rapidity, like Aries rising has a rapidness to conception, to action, through the fifth house. And fifth house can be a creativity in a group. The Sun and Mars need to be strong in order for Aries to carve successfully into the energy of a group and to make everybody believe that their insight as an Aries rising is going to lead to positive creative fruition for themselves and for the group. And it has to almost seem a bit selfish, but they need to have the consciousness of the group around them in order to fully, truly manifest it. And when this behavior turns into an ignorance of the group, this impatience may develop into frustration and then into anger at being held back by everybody. They might feel like nobody understands them, nobody gets what they're trying to do, and then they just start acting as an insubordinate and they lose the support of the group. That's why Venus as Libra is the seventh house from Aries. It's an important lesson for them, as we're going to learn here. So I love this book because it gives us this way of thinking through the natural positions of signs, their lord and their lord's exaltations in certain houses. Let's take a look at what's going on with Mars exalted in Capricorn. So Mars rules the first house. The ascendant lord is exalted in Capricorn, which is the 10th house. The Aries native therefore innately, enjoys great motivation and ambition. The Mars nature of Aries is just pouring with the energy of the 10th house. And so they tend to pioneer things well. Capricorn's ruler, Saturn, is, interestingly, debilitated in the first house. And since since Mars represents bursts of energy and Saturn represents stamina, Aries people often do not strategize well for the longer term. Aries can act very strongly with intense focus on their career when they have it in the moment. They can be very talented, very skilled, and they know how to summon all of their attention to the end of the cigarette, the single pointed ember of perfected concentration in this moment for this moment. But as time goes on, Saturn is the one who's overlooking the overall picture. And Saturn rules the 10th and 11th house. And Saturn is debilitated in the first house. So part of the reasons why Saturn is, it's like where Mars' difficulty is bad, it's kind of really bad, just like it's got a lot of good. But Saturn is really Saturn was the most difficult and worst planet for Mars. And one of the ways that this sticks so hard is because the 10th Lord and the 11th Lord are debilitated in the first house. By being an Aries, you are undercutting and undermining the long game that Saturn is supposed to represent. That's why when you have a good Saturn, it really is one of the best things an Aries can have is a good Saturn, because it's taking away the inevitable damage caused by your worst planet, which in some ways can be as good as having your best planet being well placed. The best planet, the most important planet for Aries is Jupiter, that 9th house lord. Leo is actually pretty important too. Leo by itself is the 5th lord. Jupiter's tied into the 12th house. But either way, Jupiter is really the most important planet for Aries. And it's about as bad to have a messed up Jupiter as it is to have a messed up Saturn for an Aries rising. Because a messed up Jupiter is going to take away the cream of the crop for an Aries. But a messed up Saturn is going to make bad things happen to Aries rising. There's just no getting around it. You'll never fully accomplish the things that you could accomplish if you had a better Saturn. But of course, the opposite is true as well. It's almost as good to have a good Jupiter for an Aries rising as it is to have a good Saturn. Because when you have a good Saturn, all the bad things that could happen to Aries are mitigated. The management of the shadow is as important as the management of the light. So Aries innately enjoys great motivation and ambition and to pioneer things well. But Capricorn, ruling Saturn represents stamina. So Arians do not strategize well for the longer term of themselves, of whatever they're dealing with. It's why Aries natives often need to be reminded that they will enjoy maximum success in life when they slow down and consolidate their gains. Think about their gains, think about what they do have, and to think about the future. Saturn is the one that thinks about the future, and if Aries can think about its future, it'll feel much more present and grounded and stable in the present. Because everybody needs to be able to think about that future in a way. Now, the fact that Mars, which is the lord of the lasagna, the lord of the Lagna, the lord of the rising sign. When I say Lagna and when I say lasagna, I really mean the rising sign. I'm a very mercurial person and Lagna is lasagna, but that's neither here nor there. So, the fact that Mars, the lord of the rising sign, the Lagna, is debilitated in Cancer, which is here, the 4th house of home, there's a weird word being used here, militates toward a life. So anyway, the fact that Mars, which is the lord of the rising sign, is debilitated in Cancer, which is the 4th house of home. This indicates a life lived away from one's homeland and a disinclination to settle down. Another reason why Aries natives are said to roam around like rams is that Jupiter is a naturally good friend of Mars, which causes the matters of the houses that Jupiter rules, which is houses 9 and 12, to tend to come to the forefront of an Aries' life. So Aries is the ram that does like to get around. Jupiter, no matter how you dice it or slice it, Jupiter is going to have an influence of Aries to drag it around to different places so it can see all the possible potentials of life that Aries can dig its fingers into. That is really what side of the bread Aries is buttered on. That's really how it gains wisdom and intelligence and understanding, is through Jupiter. It's how we all do. But for Aries, it's by moving about and even doing things, as we're going to talk about with Jupiter, as a sort of pilgrimage. This is this spiritual thing that I need to do for myself. It's going to be a sacrifice. I'm going to be isolated. I'm going to be by myself, traveling for the sake of my destiny and my role in life. And when it's a sacrifice that they have to do, because the 12th lord of waste and spiritual sacrifice is tied into the 9th house. And the 9th house for Sagittarius, the 9th house for Aries is ruled by Sagittarius. And you have to understand, in Vedic astrology, every planet, except for the sun and moon, rules 2 signs. And those 2 signs, one of them is going to be what's called the Mula Trikona. And it's a hard word to explain. Mula is root, and Trikona means like trik, it means 3. So this is the root trine. And what it basically means is that it is the sign of the two signs that a planet rules. The Mula Trikona is the root of the planet. So the Mula Trikona of Jupiter is Sagittarius, which means there's more. Sagittarius is always the louder of the 2 signs. So in the case of Aries, Aries is very lucky where they're lucky. There's a lot of good for Aries when it's good. Sagittarius rules the 9th house, which means that Pisces is less of an influence with its lordship than Sagittarius is. So which is stronger, the 12th house or the 9th house for Aries? It's the 9th house. And that is the more auspicious house. It's in trine with the rising sign. So Sagittarius' Jupiter energy is very good in this sense. But to bring it all this home, not only does Jupiter get Aries roaming around, but the moon is where the rising sign lord is debilitated, which means Aries is not often, by the nature of Aries, it's not thinking too much about how it's going to develop its personal private life. Its private life is something that it puts its feet on in order to stand so it can do what it wants to do in its career. That's what Aries is really focused on. The home is really just a place to put their feet while they juggle. That's Aries' life. Now, this inherent 4th house weakness in the Aries rising also promotes disagreements with the mother, particularly if the moon, which is the lord of the 4th house and the signifier of the mother, is afflicted. So Aries rising already inherently, by its nature, has disagreements with its mother, with its roots. Aries is frustrated by the fact that it has to account for its past, its childhood, its ancestry. It basically says, whatever I was given, I don't give a shit about it, because what matters is not what I am. What matters is what I do, there's a lot of truth to it. That's the divine Deva energy of Mars coming through, is whatever turd I've been given in my life, I can turn it into gold. The problem is that the 4th house is one of the 12 houses of astrology. Aries is, not caring about the 4th house is an unnatural karma. It's not natural, and they will actually do much better for themselves overall if they do account for their roots and their childhood. But particularly if the moon is afflicted, This shows Aries can have trouble with its past, with its mother, and how it was raised. The potential for differences with and or separations from their siblings is enhanced because Mercury, who's the lord of the 3rd and 6th houses, which are inauspicious naturally. Remember when we said the 3rd and the 6th house and the 11th house are the most difficult houses. In some ways, it might be said, really Saturn is the worst planet for Aries. Mercury is definitely the second most. Mercury and Saturn are almost tied because Mercury causes a lot of trouble for Aries. And then Venus is like not even that big a deal. Venus is almost neutral, but it is technically inauspicious. So Mercury rules the inauspicious 3rd and 6th house. These are houses that are hungry. These are houses that cause difficulty. Thankfully, the 6th house gets better as you move on through life. The 3rd and the 6th always cause difficulty for everybody. To have them both ruled by one and the same planet definitely shows some difficulty. And Virgo in particular rules the 6th house. Virgo is the mula tricona of Mercury. The 6th house of enemies and of difficulties, strategical things that mess with the Aries. It's essentially, Aries says, I can deal with it. I will be able to get through problems. Give me the problems. And its bread is buttered on the side of that courage, that action, that forward movement. And so it's the barbarian in a Dungeons and Dragons game. The barbarian just says, let's just push through. And everyone's like, that barbarian is carrying us all with its push through energy. But then there's sometimes in the Dungeons and Dragons game when it comes to a puzzle. And the barbarian, if left by themselves, which they often will because they don't know how to... Mercury causes problems for them because they're so forward thinking. They're so instinctive. And the group that they're with gets frustrated with them. It's like, barbarian, wait. Don't just put your hammer through the door. There might be a trap. You're going to screw us all. Wait. You know, this is like what the barbarian gets. And it's like, no, I'm just going to do it. And then they do it. You know, the barbarian says, you know, fuck this thinking about it. If I just push through this, I might screw this stage up, but there's going to be a part where I'm good at what I'm good at. Mercury likes to be good at a little bit of everything, or just to be skilled and savvy, to work smarter so that they don't have to work as hard for the things that come along. One of the reasons that Aries gets damaged in its long game, not only because they don't even care about the long game through Saturn, but they waste a lot of energy along the way to getting to Saturn, to getting to the end of things. And that's because they don't want to be strategical. They'd rather just blow through things. And this can cause them to have a lot of difficulty along the way. This causes them not to be able to be as naturally coherent as a communicator in a group. But to have a great Mercury, you know, it is still the planet of the 3rd and 6th house. So really, Mercury is actually very important for Aries in being the strategical, logical mind that uses especially the resources around it. Aries is already cerebral and strategical. But to be truly strategical, you have to use all the communication power that you have at your disposal. You'll always get frustrated having to communicate with people, but if you have a good Mercury, it is a profoundly good thing for an Aries to have. So Mercury blends together in a rather unattractive way. The 6th house indication of suffering and the 3rd house indication of siblings. So the early childhood energy of the difficulty with the moon, combined with the very gnarly Mercury energy of the 3rd house, shows that early childhood life, especially with siblings, can be tricky. If you are an Aries rising older brother, it's the least difficult. Or if you're an Aries rising eldest sister, it's the least difficult. But you get into problems when you are a middle child or the youngest child, depending. Every family situation is different. But middle children with Aries rising can have a lot of trouble. Particularly boys, because they can be competitive in this way. I don't know. I'm a middle child. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Now, since the sun rules the 5th house of progeny, and it is a mutual friend of Mars, Aries rising may be very interested in offspring. The sun is a mutual friend of Mars. The 5th house is the house of progeny, and the planets, the sun, has to do with creativity and offspring in this way. So Aries may be interested in offspring. The 5th house lord being exalted in the 1st house further implicates this. But they don't usually produce a large brood, because the sun does not signify children. Excuse me for saying just a moment ago that it did. The sun signifies your kingdom. This is I'm stepping on my own tongue here, but it's true. I'm reading this, and this would be the authority here. I often consider the sun to be a planet of children, but it's really not. It's a malefic. It's dry. It's not about being with the children. But Leo, ruling the 5th house, being exalted in the 1st house, does show the 5th house nature of children is coming through Aries rising. But they don't produce a large brood of children because the sun's it doesn't signify children per se. So they want to have a small number of children and have quality children as a way for them to carve their axe, which may seem tough, but it all really depends on the sun and the mothering qualities of the Aries rising, especially if this is a woman's chart. How the moon and the feminine planets are doing is going to say a lot about how you nurture your children and what you do with them. It's also worth mentioning the natural fieriness of the sun and of Mars can tend to reduce fertility in Aries, because Pitta burns the sperm or the ovum. The Pitta nature, really, a certain amount of warmth is ideal for children and for, having a child. But Pitta and energy can actually burn out a child and undermine it in a certain way. So that is it's Kappa. Oh, excuse me. Kappa dosha relates to early life. Pitta is midlife. And then Vata is the end of life. Kappa relates to having children and progeny. Pitta is more about okay, I've got kids, now what am I doing with my life? And Mars relates more to this. They want to have kids just to have kids, really in the end as an extension of their creativity, their self-respect, their validation, what they want, of having more clay to carve out of the marble of the earth to create good things and to move further in their progression of themselves. Which does show that an Aries rising intends for their children to be an asset. Take that with however many objective grains of salt you wish. That just is their intention. That's Aries' intention when they have kids. This is an extension of my greatness. It does go to there's a positivity and a negativity to this. If the kid has male energy and is conducive to being receptive to the guruship of their father, especially if Aries has a good Jupiter, they understand through their own father how to interact with their father and to carry the torch of wisdom and all the goodness inside of every person. That's Jupiter. It's the goodness inside of everybody. If Aries rising has children and they have good Jupiter, they will extend the goodness of themselves to their children through this way of wanting to do best, wanting to do their best. Their children will pick up the scent of that torch of that nature, and their children will be well served by it. That pushiness of Aries is not necessarily an antagonistic, difficult, evil thing. It's part of Aries' nature, and even when impressed upon their children can be a good thing. But it's just good to be aware of the fact that the difficult moon and feminine signs in the chart does indicate that an Aries can be a little too pushy, a little too tough on their children, expecting a lot more from them without relating to them. Definitely something to keep in mind.